Hi, congratulations. That was really a wonderful thing. And I know this is a partisan audience, but I also think it was a really beautifully done and complex film. So I just wanted to give you my own shout out.
Thank
It's
you.
really wonderful. Can I start with a question for you?
Sure.
Which is, I mean, I guess I want to know why you did it, but I also specifically want to know, the arc of the film obviously goes from being quite specific about bikes to being much more about sort of governance questions. So maybe you could just explain that a little bit, and also explain how much that tracks sort of real life events in the last few years.
Yeah, well, when I set out to make this film, because I'm a poor independent guy, I needed a local story, and so, but I also needed or really wanted a story that reflected sort of my sort of sick feelings about what's happening on a larger scale in politics in this country, and it also just goes to show that there's a great deal of just randomness and good luck in making a film, because when I started this, I had no idea that this would play out in the way that it did, which was really wonderful, both in terms of the actual result is surprisingly actually quite good for at least 2/3 of McGinnis. Part of it is still not done, but anyway, so yeah, I think it was a combination of a local story about transportation, which is something I've just been personally passionate about, and an attempt to find something that reflected the sort of larger political scene.
And what is that larger political message you're trying to convey?
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear. I would say maybe that the one thing I tried to do in this film is also that it had an educational component about the ways, the history of our streets, which most people don't know, including I didn't really know, and also issues about, like intuitively you would think, yeah, taking away car lanes is going to result in horrible traffic, and in fact that's not true, and I think a lot of our politics is driven by the fact that people don't know their history and they don't know the facts, and people are sort of just choosing, based on sort of tribal allegiances, including the people in Greenpoint, like which side to be on, instead of sort of doing their homework. And so I guess that's maybe my largest point.
So, Janette, we met actually biking down 9th Avenue, I think. I look back on that and think about what your strategy was, which was partly, as you said here, like, we'll paint the lane and we'll see how it goes, and if people like it, we'll keep it. Which was sort of a way of working around some of the problems, the governance problems that the film makes very clear. Because you certainly got a lot of blowback, but you also made sure that something happened that people could experience, so that, as Charlie and others, John and others were saying, when they got to know it, they would come to feel that change was possible. Maybe just talk a little bit more about this. I'm going somewhere with this because I think this is, I began by saying this is a crowd of a certain sort, that we all share certain views. And I just want to explore that a little bit, because it's gotten this country into a lot of trouble.
Not the people in this room.
No, I think we have a lot of responsibility too. I think because we're quite sure we're absolutely right. So I just want to talk about this issue, because we are probably all people who fundamentally agree. So when you began to put in those bike lanes, what was actually your strategy? Like, you were doing this with an idea that you wanted to get something done, despite the fact that there were probably a lot of people who were opposed to it, right?
I think it's really important, and this is true in city after city, that you can't just put in one project here and one project there. You really have to have a vision and a strategy for why you are making these kinds of changes. It wasn't just because we like bike lanes, so we're putting down bike lanes. There was a purpose to it. And Mike Bloomberg's Plan YC was a really important part of that change, because it really was about, we have to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. You know, if we got 1 million more people coming, we're going to reduce GHG by 30%. And how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to have to get people out of their cars and make it easier to get around by walking and biking and transit. That was the big narrative, right? The meta narrative. But then how do you actually get it done? And I think a big part of, you know, Charlie talks about this and others have talked about this, you know, it's one thing to say that this is our policy, and it's another thing to do it, right? Like to, you know, plan is human and to implement is divine. And it is true, but our processes, to your point on governance, are really geared to getting to know, really geared to getting to know. And so anytime you propose something against the status quo, it's just no, we're fine, no, it's a change, we don't like it. And so a way around that is to demonstrate something actually with a project in the ground. So you don't debate it for 25 years or go through what everybody went through on McGuinness, right? Like you show what can be done. And I think it's a cultural change because changing the culture is really, really hard. And if you just wait, you know, to convince everybody with data and engineering drawings, you're not going to get there. So actually acting to show the possibility of the street is critical.
Right. So in the case of McGuinness, you go through more than 2 years of these conversations. What is the lesson of that? Like, we were all sort of, you know, reacting to the community meetings and the back and forth. What is the, actually, I wanted to press you more, what is the message that you're suggesting? No, seriously, I think it's really super interesting.
Yeah, I do. I mean, this may not be an answer exactly, but I think part of the lesson I took from this is just how contingent everything is. Like this finally happened because a teacher was killed, a mayor was indicted. Like it wouldn't have happened without all of these rather unlikely things happening. I think if our politics was somehow more functional, you know, this would have been part of some systematic look at the whole city and addressing, you know, dangerous streets as a whole. But the way things are working right now, it's things only happen when somebody's killed. They might happen, and then even then, it wasn't going to happen because a few powerful people in the community didn't want it to happen. And the only reason you get past that is because these people happen to get into legal trouble.
Yeah. So the Brooklyn Bridge was built. Someone can correct me here if I'm wrong, but if I remember, the Brooklyn Bridge was 3 times over budget, so 3 times as long as promised, and was a gigantic scandal. It took 15 years, not 5, and it cost, I think, $15 million or something like this. And then as soon as it opened, it was the greatest thing that had ever happened in American history, and the celebration was considered greater than anything that, there was a woman who was alive, right, still when the moon landing happened. And she said the celebration was much greater for the opening of the Brooklyn Bridge. I've been wrestling with that thought for a while too. I was thinking about doing this stuff. So you have 150 years ago, enormous opposition in New York. The thing was a total scandal, you know, because there was corruption and thievery. There were concerns about safety, and people thought, we don't need the bridge, we have the ferries. I'm not actually coming to a specific conclusion, because it's also true that when we look back on it, like we built the Brooklyn Bridge in 15 years, like we can't even like fix a park on the Lower East Side in 15 years. So there's something miraculous about time, and also about the way when you're in the middle of these processes, they seem unbearable, complex, messy, contingent, expensive, wasteful. And then in retrospect, so it's not just that you get used to bike lanes and they're the right thing, that there's also something about the process of democracy itself that's complicated, and that I think we have been wrestling with since the beginning of this country, but that has become more complicated as we have instituted increasing number of ways, right, to allow participatory, to even require participatory processes. Because what came through in your film was, you know, and Sam mentioned this, right, like Koch goes to China in the same way Bloomberg sort of wanted to know what worked. He saw something, he told Sam to do it in 1980, and then 6 weeks later it's like, oh, forget this. And then it was precisely Koch's resistance to the bike lanes later that sparked the movement in the beginning for bikes. That's a really interesting top-down, and so were you ultimately able to do things because you were working with the mayor. You worked with the mayor who wanted to know what worked, and he gave you a lot of leeway.
I'm not quite sure the question, but
Well,
I
yeah.
agree with
I'm
all
not
of
sure
that.
either. Well, okay, I'll put it.
But
into
I do think that, I mean, part of the thing is it wasn't like we waved a wand and everything just happened and we didn't talk to anybody, right? Like that's not exactly right. But we really did focus very importantly and very granularly with community boards. And I think a big piece of it was actually starting with what's the problem you're trying to solve, right? Like, and we would go to them and talk about the traffic fatalities in the community board, right? Like this was what was going on. And so we weren't recommending a particular project, but we're saying this is a problem. What do you want to do? And starting early with that kind of a conversation, not coming in with a project at that point, but going in to say, this is the situation, let's talk about the situation, was really important. And I think also breaking down, we really worked hard on the community process so that instead of, you saw in McGinnis, like one person with the microphone like, this sucks, and like shuts everybody else down who wants to say something. That's not a really effective way of getting community input because people are, concerned about going up against the bully. And so if you have smaller tables and you do the input a little differently, you can actually get some really thoughtful input in ways that you wouldn't be able to do with the traditional way of, the microphone and the yelling. And so we did very much focus on communities, but community boards are also advisory. They're not decisive, in terms of a project. And we really focused on safety. That was our North Star. Every single thing we did was on safety, and we actually mapped out the most dangerous intersections, the most dangerous corridors, and that's where we focused our work. So I think it's still a really important lens, even in this really, really troubled time, and we really need to look at how we can tell this story more effectively. And I think that's one of the things that's really exciting about the new generation of leadership that you're seeing. Emily Gallagher was amazing, Lincoln Ressler, amazing, Antonio Reynoso, amazing, like all the people in this room, amazing. And that's the next generation that grew up with these changes. They know these changes. This isn't foreign, this isn't Copenhagen, this is New York City. And I think it's really exciting. And I think we're going to, we have a streets master plan that the city council passed in 2019. That's the roadmap. And our soon-to-be elected mayor has said he's going to do McGinnis and he's going to finish it and he's going to do the master plan. So I think we're at a really exciting tipping point. And I think you brought us that story, and that's such an important piece of what we build from.
You were going to say something.
Thank you.
So, clearly that also came across in the film, this generational shift, and you speak of it specifically about baby boomers and also about an older population that tends to go to these meetings. And but that was, I'm sure everyone else here sort of got what was the clear message. There's a larger sort of American story in that divide. It's a generational divide, but it's also a cultural divide. You made clear that there's a perception of a younger generation moving in around McGinnis who represent a different class, different maybe educational class, different backgrounds. So it's not just generational, though that's a part of it. Maybe you could talk about that a little bit more. Like how did you didn't talk to many of the people who were opponents. I guess most of them didn't want to talk to you. So maybe you could just describe what you were perceiving yourself about that divide.
To some extent, I think this was sort of a proxy fight about gentrification in the end, which is also why it doesn't actually make sense. Like the people that are against it in general, I didn't hear a lot of actual reasons that made sense. But what does make sense is these new people coming in and they're changing things, and that's somehow, again, it becomes an identity issue instead of like, well, how are we actually going to like safely get around? So I would say that very clearly. What else can I say? That I do think, that we're in this weird time when everything is perceived to have two sides, like only two sides, and they can't compromise about anything. And this also sort of came up. It seems to be an illustration of that. Like you could design a street a million different ways, and the people that were against it could have come up and said, well, we like this element of the plan, but not that element of the plan, or something. But it wasn't that. It was just we're putting a flag in the ground, and we're we don't want any of it. And the first hint that something's getting, that opposition is rising is a woman who has, at the march for the people that are for the plan, she puts her hands on her ears and says, I don't want to hear it, we're Greenpoint people. Well, those are also Greenpoint people. I found that kind of fascinating. I don't know if that answers to your point at all.
Yeah, no, it's quite.
No, I think it's right. I think the thing that's the hard part, but the good part is, it is always going to be a fight, right? Like when you change things, it's going to be a fight. And, in some ways it's kind of depressing. It's been like 17 years since we put in the first protected bike lane, and, you saw, Matthew Jensen, who could have been Allison Liao, from Flushing in 2013. And I think, the bike lane, starting with like Prospect Park West and Kent Avenue goes straight through to McInnes Avenue. It's kind of the same universal objections, right? And so in some ways, it's not changed that much, and you still have to fight the same battles. But the thing that is the constant is it's literally true that the advocates make all the difference. And so when the advocates are there, that they have the back and they can actually turn the tide. All of this stuff, and it's true, Mike Bloomberg, we wouldn't have had these changes without Mike Bloomberg, but we also wouldn't have been able to do what we did without the advocates who did 25 years worth of work to get us to where we were. And so that work has to go on. And when we've got our next mayor, sorry, I'm talking. We're going to need everybody in this room, in rooms like it, to have his back to make these changes, because the fight is still going to go on, and we really need to make that happen. And so, I think, and we've made good progress too, right? Like, we have, 17 rapid bus lanes. We have, 620,000 people ride bikes every day in New York City. That's amazing, right? We have congestion pricing, right? I mean, it only took us 17 years, but we've got it, right? And people now like it, right? So you do the project and you see even people in parts of the city that you wouldn't expect like it, in Staten Island and places. So it's, change can happen, and I think it's really important that, the proof is in the project and not the process.
Well, that's a really interesting way to put it, because this is sort of what I'm trying to stumble around to figure out, because so much of it is process, and so much of the way we have. So didn't we react to Moses by saying we have to change the process? Like, the process is wrong. It's just way too top down. This is not right for this person. It was the same era, right? That we were acting against Moses, against Nixon, against the Vietnam War, Rachel Carson against nuclear physicists who thought they knew about, marine biology, and Jacobs talking about Moses. It was like, this is not working. We need to get more people at the table, more voices represented, more experts of different sorts. And here we are sitting here, and we're sort of saying that the process has become a problem. Again, I'm not actually making an argument, I'm just raising it. I think if we live in our bubble, we have a way of assuming that this is how things are supposed to work, and then we complain because they don't. And we are now in a society where there is a kind of threat of authority from a federal government, and we don't, we worry about our liberties and democracy. So I think it's really an interesting question, even about deciding about a bike lane in Greenpoint, how are these decisions, who ultimately, is it just that it's not us who's making a decision, or it's okay when it is us? Or have we constructed processes we need to sort of redo again? We redid them in the 70s. So what I'm trying to ask you guys, and I hope this isn't boring the tears out of everyone's face, but we're trying to ask you guys, because I really feel there's a powerful message in the film, is, is there a template here? If we agree that what McGinnis was trying to become was really good, but it's really difficult and it's contingent, then what are we supposed to do? Is it just getting, Charles and John to stand up all the time? Or is it, and everybody else in this room? Or is there something else that we need to change?
Well, I'll just volunteer that you could argue that the process worked pretty well. There was a 2-year planning stage that came up with a good plan. And the reason it didn't happen was because of corruption, which was eventually uncovered. So part of the problem is if you have corrupt leadership, the best planning isn't going to work. But if you have less corrupt leadership, you might have a chance, I think.
Yeah.
That's a simple answer, but
Well, that's what I was asking about the Brooklyn Bridge. Do we see something in the process and think that it's broken, and then look back and just think that was, you said 2 years is not bad. Do you agree with that? To put in a bike lane?
I think Ben is right. I mean, it was a healthy process, right? They went through, and projects always get tweaked and changed, and that's what happened along the way. So this wasn't just like the Department of Transportation coming down and saying, this is what's going to happen on McGinnis Boulevard. I mean, again, it was a big consultation. So I think it is a successful model. But it is, I mean, anything can go sideways with politics, which we've seen. But I do think that we've got some really good hope ahead.
Yeah, so talk about that a little bit. What is it that you, if you were talking to Soran Mamdani now, hypothetically, what would you be instructing would be his first priorities, and how would you tell him to approach problems like bike lanes?
Just small.
Yeah, well, you got an audience.
I mean, first of all, he's got a really good vision, right? His policies are really strong. Like, he's already said what he's going to be doing, on the top 5 projects that were stopped by this administration, like moving forward day one. He said he's going to do the city council master plan for buses and bike lanes. That's great. He's focused on safety. You saw him come out in this film, right, talking about that, and that's very, very powerful. So I feel like he's got the policies, and I feel like, he understands the importance of implementation, and so that's going to be the real test, is really putting people in place to be able to move fast, to show it's possible. But the thing that I think that he also brings to the table, which we have not had for such a long time, is he's such a powerful communicator. And that is such a strong leg of making things happen here. And I think that leaning into that communication is really important. People campaign in poetry and govern in prose, and it looks like he's going to be campaigning in poetry and implementing with prose. And I think that's really, really strong. That communication is key, whether it's at the local level, whether it's at the mayoral level, whether it's at the state level. I think it's crucial, and that's what's exciting to me, is that it's getting the implementation piece down that's going to be the challenge.
Can I ask about because it came up in the film and a bunch of people were saying this too. Obviously, we're not a city designed for e-bikes and mopeds, and the system is causing a lot of friction, as everyone says. What would you do right now, just like to immediately, to try to address that?
Well, I mean, it's not an issue of 2 things. One, we haven't redesigned the bike lane since in 17 years, right? Like, we have to adapt to the e-mobility and have micromobility lanes. We need dedicated lanes for these fast vehicles. I think that's a big piece, and sort of sitting down and actually looking at who's using the streets and how is a really big part of it. And I think enforcement is a huge part of it. And so we've not done any enforcement, and Gersh did a great job doing that, and so many others have done really great sort of tactical activism and sort of shown what's possible. But we really have to get a handle on that. And I would go directly at the app companies. And there's some good legislation to get that done. And we need to get that done as soon as possible, because it's not about the people that are on the lowest rung of the economic ladder. That's not the issue. The issue is, who is actually making the decisions that force this to happen on our streets.
So I don't know if I'm getting, should I open up to questions or no?
No, we got a
No.
rough answer.
So sorry, I'm sure none of you have any questions anyway, because you're not a very opinionated group probably, but I'm sure afterwards you guys can chat.
More of a little shake.
Yeah.
Nice.
Thank you so much and congratulations again.
Thanks.
It's really